They mocked a war hero. They laughed at the old man in uniform, thought he was lost, out of place. But 30 minutes later, they stood in silence. Welcome to NT, where everyday kindness becomes unforgettable. Let's begin this journey together. That afternoon, the sun hung high in a cloudless blue sky, shining straight down on the stone courtyard of Jefferson Military Academy. Once a tough training ground, now one of the most respected institutions in the country. At the front gate, an elderly figure appeared, moving slowly with a slight drag in his right leg. The soft scrape of his shoe against the pavement made a quiet but steady rhythm, one of quiet strength. Raymond Carter, 78 years old, wasn't the kind of man who'd catch your eye right away because of his looks. He wasn't tall, and he didn't carry himself with flashy confidence. But there was something about him, a presence, that made it hard to look away. His hair was short, neatly trimmed, snow white. His skin, weathered and deeply lined, spoke of years spent under open skies, through jungles, deserts, and the chaos of war. He wore an old olive green uniform, the collar crisp, sleeves rolled just right to reveal sun-darkened arms still showing muscle. On his chest, a row of medals and faded service pins, dulled by time, but heavy with meaning to those who knew what they stood for. What truly stood out wasn't the uniform or the limp, it was his eyes, sharp, alert, and unwavering, like he could see straight through a person. He didn't flinch at the curious stares or hushed whispers coming from a nearby group of cadets. To him, that noise was nothing, just wind passing through a foxhole. He had survived far worse. Every step he took was deliberate, not because he was tired, but because his right leg still carried the weight of a shrapnel wound from 1972, when he dragged a wounded brother in arms out of an ambush in the Vietnam. Doctors had told him he'd never walk again, yet here he was, almost 50 years later, walking without a cane, held up by grit and discipline alone. In his right hand, he carried a worn brown leather briefcase, scuffed at the corners, the brass latch tarnished with age. Inside were a few handwritten pages, a speech he'd started writing at 3 a.m. the night before. He never liked public speaking, but when it came to sacrifice and loyalty, every word he wrote carried the weight of blood, sweat, and the last words of men who never made it home. And today, he was returning to a place where, many years ago, he had trained a new generation of officers, bringing with him quiet dignity, simple strength, and a heart that had never stopped burning. As Raymond Carter stepped through the east gate of the academy grounds, where the dormitories connected with the main administrative wing, a soft early summer breeze stirred the American flag flying high above the main building. In his hand was the same worn leather briefcase. His right leg dragged slightly with each step, leaving a faint, steady scrape on the stone walkway beneath him. Ahead of him stretched a shaded corridor lined with trees, a spot where cadets often gathered during lunch to relax and talk. A group of 5 young cadets sat near a stone bench, dressed neatly in academy uniforms but slouching like they owned the place. They were laughing loudly about something until one of them spotted Raymond approaching in the distance. He raised an eyebrow and nudged the guy next to him. "Hey, check out that old dude. Civil War reenactment or what? Bet he's filming a documentary for the History Channel. Those medals gotta be fake. No way that's real." Guys like that always show up to ramble about the good old days. Who even invites these people to our school? As Raymond came closer, the group didn't move aside. Instead, they intentionally blocked the path, pretending to be caught up in their conversation, forcing him to slow down. One of them snapped his fingers mockingly and smirked. "Hey, sir, looking for the museum? Might have taken a wrong turn, or maybe the assisted living wing? Need a hand getting there?" Raymond stopped, said nothing. He didn't look angry, he just looked at them, calmly, with eyes as sharp as razors, the kind of eyes that had stared death in the face and didn't blink. But they didn't recognize that look. All they saw was an old man, thin and stiff, in a faded uniform, and they thought that meant they could laugh. They didn't let him pass, they kept poking, mocking, like it was some kind of midday entertainment. One even held up his phone and said loudly, "Hello, Military Museum. I just found a walking exhibit." Raymond eventually sat down quietly on a bench, choosing not to escalate anything. He opened his briefcase, adjusted his papers, and focused on staying calm. Minutes passed. The group wandered off, then came back again, tossing out snide remarks here and there. No one stepped in. No one knew who he was. Not until 30 minutes later, when Principal Marcus Ellis happened to be walking through the main corridor on his way to prepare for the afternoon's event. His eyes swept casually across the courtyard, then suddenly stopped. That posture, that limp, the way he held that briefcase, those medals. It couldn't be. But it was. The moment Principal Marcus Ellis laid eyes on the man sitting quietly under the shade of the trees, he stopped in his tracks. In the middle of that wide, noisy courtyard, it was as if time paused for just a few seconds. He stared at the hunched figure, then moved quickly, his voice firm, carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "All of you, stand at attention." The group of cadets who'd been laughing turned sharply, startled. They didn't expect the tall man in the gray suit moving with purpose down the walkway to be the principal, a former officer with a reputation for discipline and zero tolerance for disrespect. But Ellis didn't stop to lecture them. He walked right past and headed straight toward Raymond Carter, who was still seated, his head slightly bowed as he flipped through a few handwritten pages inside his worn briefcase. Raymond looked up when he saw a polished pair of dress shoes stop in front of him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, no words were needed. They both remembered. Kandahar, 2004. A surprise ambush. A young officer, terrified and disoriented, on the brink of being lost. It was Sergeant Raymond Carter, calm under fire, who had carried Marcus Ellis on his back through a mine-laced desert, saving the entire squad. Principal Ellis straightened his spine, raised his hand and gave a slow, full military salute. His eyes beginning to mist, he spoke loud enough for every student nearby to hear. "The man you mocked is the man who saved my life and the lives of my team. Nearly 20 years ago, he is someone I never had the chance to properly thank until today." The courtyard fell completely silent. The young cadets who had been laughing now lowered their heads. No more smirks, no more jokes. One or two even reached up to adjust their collars as if trying to hide the sudden flush of shame. Raymond stood up slowly, gave a small nod, not of pride but of quiet understanding. He didn't scold anyone. He simply looked at Marcus and said softly, "I came to the right place, didn't I?" Marcus's voice broke just slightly as he answered, "No, sir. We're the ones who are lucky you came back." That afternoon, the main auditorium at Jefferson Military Academy was packed. In the front rows sat veteran instructors and senior officers. Every seat behind them was filled with young cadets, including the 5 students from earlier that day, now sitting up straight, silent, their eyes fixed on the stage. Under soft golden lights, with the American flag hanging proudly behind him, Raymond Carter stepped up to the podium. He didn't need help, though his right leg still dragged slightly with each step. His eyes scanned the room, not judging, not blaming, just the gaze of a man who had lost too much and survived to tell the story. At the podium, he opened his old leather briefcase, pulled out a few handwritten pages, then paused and gently set them aside. He didn't need them. His voice was deep, gravelly, each word clear, full of quiet power. "I've lived long enough to know war doesn't end when the shooting stops. It stays with the ones who come back. I'm not here to tell you about how I was a hero. I'm here because I lived, and because some of the best men I ever knew didn't." You could hear a pin drop in the room. He paused for a moment, letting the silence settle. His eyes found the back row where the 5 cadets now sat with their heads slightly bowed. "This morning, I met some young men. They looked at me and saw an old uniform, a limp. They laughed, but I didn't get angry, because I understand. If no one teaches you what sacrifice looks like, how can you know to honor it?" A few heads lowered. A senior officer discreetly wiped the corner of his eye with a handkerchief. Raymond continued, his voice softening like a quiet message meant for everyone. Honor doesn't live in how you look. It lives in what you do when no one's watching. It lives in how you treat those who came before you. No one's born knowing, but anyone can learn, and it's never too late to start learning. Then, just before stepping away from the podium, he left the crowd with one final line, simple but heavy with meaning. I don't need an apology. I just need you to become the kind of men your teammates will one day be proud to follow. And with that, the entire auditorium rose to their feet in thunderous applause. The afternoon ended with a long, heartfelt round of applause, but its echo lingered in the minds of everyone who had been there. Among them were the 5 young cadets from that morning, now walking out of the auditorium in silence. No more jokes, no sideways smirks, just a heavy, quiet feeling settling deep in their chests. Part shame, part awakening. That evening, they met behind the dorms. Not to mess around, but to finally say out loud what they had all been feeling but none had dared to admit. Brian Haskins, the one who had started the teasing earlier that day, was the first to speak. His voice was low. I've never heard someone speak and feel like they saw straight through me. Another cadet added, I kept thinking about my grandpa. He served too, but he never talked about it. And today we laughed at Mr. Carter like we were laughing at him. They made a decision none of them expected. To walk, on their own, to the local veteran center, just under 2 miles from campus. Not one of them had ever been inside. The next morning, bright and early Saturday, they showed up in simple uniforms and knocked on the office door. An older man, likely a retired vet himself, opened it with a skeptical look. What do you boys need? Brian didn't hesitate. We'd like to volunteer, sir. Anything you've got, house repairs, carrying supplies, cleaning, just listening. We're not here to take, we're here to help. At first, the veterans at the center greeted them with cold stares. They'd heard too many empty promises from people who meant well but never came back. But then, a name changed everything. One older veteran, white-haired and sitting by the window, gave a quiet smile. Those kids from the academy? I heard they met Mr. Carter. From that moment on, the door slowly began to open. A few handshakes, fewer wary looks, and those small acts, pushing wheelchairs, fixing broken railings, pulling weeds around the center, turned into lessons you'll never find in a textbook. Just a few weeks after that day, the name Raymond Carter started coming up more and more in quiet conversations around Jefferson Military Academy. Not under spotlights or during ceremonies, but in the hushed tone of hallway whispers, in the way cadets paused when they saw an elderly man quietly walking across the courtyard. Principal Marcus Ellis made sure that moment wasn't just remembered. It became part of the academy's culture. He required all incoming freshmen to attend a new orientation session, which opened with a video of Mr. Carter's speech. At the very end of the video, 6 simple words appeared on the screen. Now also etched in bold letters at the front gates of the school, you never know who you're standing before. A program called the Raymond Initiative was soon launched. It connected cadets with local veterans, encouraging them to volunteer, help with groceries, fix up homes, or simply sit and listen to stories. It wasn't about charity, it was about learning, not from textbooks, but from lives truly lived. As for Raymond Carter, he didn't return to the stage. No more speeches. He turned down interview requests and even a formal commendation from the Department of Defense. When asked why, he simply said, I didn't do any of it to have my name remembered. I did it because I'm still here, and I know there are folks out there who need someone. He still visited the Veterans Center every week. Still walked slowly on that worn leg. Still carried that same weathered leather briefcase. But now, when he stepped through the door, the very same people who once mocked him stood up to greet him first. Brian and his friends stayed involved with the center all the way until graduation. And on the day they received their officer pins, they made one final visit to the small room where Mr. Carter used to sit, not to apologize, but to say thank you. His legacy wasn't written in medals, it was in what he taught a generation. To bow their heads when it's right, and to lift them high when it matters most. Not everyone who wears a uniform gets applause, and not everyone in a faded one gets the respect they deserve. But one thing never changes. Across time, across generations, sacrifice is always worth honoring. Raymond Carter never asked for a spotlight. He didn't step up to be called a hero. He only wanted one simple thing, that the next generation understand the value of those who came before them. This story isn't just about a veteran who was misunderstood. It's about how we see others before we know who they are. Because sometimes the way we look at someone is the very thing that shapes how they're treated. You don't need to be a soldier to show respect. You just need to be someone who listens, who knows when to bow their head and when to stand up for what's right. If you believe veterans, no matter their age or situation, deserve respect, leave a comment with the word respect. Sometimes a simple word from you is all it takes to warm the heart of someone who once gave everything for this country. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you of someone, a family member, a friend, or maybe just a quiet soul who once passed through your life, subscribe to Honest Moments. Here, we don't tell stories to shock, we tell them to move people, to remind us, and to hold on to the most honest moments the world so often forgets.